Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly through ancient dust, where the sky pulses with mystery and the earth smells like baked clay. It's warm, the kind of heat that settles in your bones and makes everything feel a little slower, a little heavier. Above you, a velvet black sky stretches wide, speckled with stars you could almost pluck from the air like figs. The streets of Babylon murmur in the dark. Oil lamps flicker behind reed mats, casting long shadows that sway like sleepy dancers. A soft breeze stirs the date palms, and somewhere nearby, the low moan of a lyre floats through the night air. But you're not here for lullabies. You're here for charts. Ancient, crumbly, surprisingly clever charts. You're here to meet the people who pressed the movements of planets into clay while the rest of the world was still staring at clouds. And spoiler, you probably won't survive this. Not because of some cosmic catastrophe, but because ancient Babylon wasn't exactly known for air conditioning, clean drinking water, or forgiving rulers. But hey, you'll be fine. Probably. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop your location and local time in the comments so I know who's stargazing with me tonight from the other side of the sky. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your night walk at the edge of the Euphrates River, its dark water slipping silently past the baked mud walls of Babylon. Even at night, the city breathes in low, steady rhythms. Guard posts murmur, animals stir, and the torches on temple terraces still flicker stubbornly into the dark. You pass a man crouched beside a kiln, carefully pulling out a set of small, flat tablets. They're still hot, and he hisses as he shifts them to cool. Each is marked with tiny wedge-shaped script, cuneiform impressions made with a reed stylus and pressed in columns. Some are lists, some are ledgers. But the ones you're looking for, the ones tucked away in temple libraries, tell stories of the sky. Babylonians, for all their militarism, bureaucracy, and inventiveness, had a love affair with the heavens. Not the mythic sort where gods lob lightning bolts for fun, though they had those stories too, but a precise, methodical obsession with what the stars were actually doing. You trudge up the winding steps of a temple ziggurat, one of those tiered mountains of brick that seem too stubborn to crumble. At the top, a narrow platform opens up to the sky, and a lone priest stands squinting upward, holding a flat slate of wet clay. He's tracking Mars tonight. You can tell because the tiny etchings on his tablet already contain a row of recorded positions. He marks the red dot's new placement with steady fingers, careful not to smudge the damp surface. And just like that, the movement of a planet joins a growing record stretching back hundreds of years. This is where science meets ritual. Where tracking planets isn't just stargazing, it's statecraft. Babylonians believed that what happened up there meant something down here. The sky wasn't just a background for dreams. It was a billboard for fate. And yet, beneath all the religious gloss and prophetic poetry, they were doing something that feels startlingly modern. They were collecting data. Some of the oldest clay tablets in the Babylonian collection, like those recovered from Nineveh and Sippar, contain nothing but numbers. Long lists of dates and coordinates. On the 5th of Tammuz, Venus was in the east. On the 10th of Elul, Jupiter was bright in the south. Day after day, generation after generation. You wonder what kind of discipline it takes to do that, to record the sky with no telescope, no guarantee that anyone will understand it centuries later, just a deep belief that the heavens repeat themselves. And here's where it gets stranger. They were right. Hidden within their dry numbers and dusty tablets are patterns, real patterns. Cycles of planetary motion that modern astronomers would later rediscover with lenses and models and math. You lean on the parapet, gazing out at the stars above Babylon. The Milky Way drapes the sky in a dusty band, and you try to imagine seeing it every night with no electric lights to ruin the view. Jupiter hangs low, glowing like a divine eye. Saturn sits farther back, pale and shy. You try to track them the way the priests did, watching, noting, carving their behavior into memory and then into clay. But this isn't just about planets. It's about control. If you can predict what Jupiter will do next month, maybe you can predict what your enemies will do or whether the crops will survive. And it wasn't just predictions. The priests weren't always neutral scientists, they had power. Their readings were delivered directly to the king. If the stars looked grim, so did next week's policies. One mainstream historical fact here: Babylonian astronomers recorded planetary movements using a sexagesimal base 60 numerical system. Yes, the same base. 60 system that gives us 60 minutes in an hour and 360 degrees in a circle. You're still living with their math. Fringe tidbit? Some of their planetary charts contain symbols that modern scholars haven't fully translated. One in particular, a spiral over Mars's name, has prompted speculation ranging from "it means chaos" to "it was just a mistake." And scholars still argue whether the Babylonians genuinely understood planetary cycles or were just very good at noticing patterns. Did they know why retrograde motion happened? Or did they just shrug and record it? As the temple priest begins a quiet chant beside you, marking the transition of one planetary position to another, you feel a strange calm settle in. It's the rhythm, the steady, patient rhythm of observation. Watch, record, sleep, repeat. The tablet cools. The stars continue their march. And somewhere down in the city, a scribe prepares to store today's sky report alongside hundreds of others. An ancient archive of glittering dots and dusty lines, waiting for someone like you to read between them. You smile, because the stars don't feel quite so far now. You step down from the temple's terrace, leaving behind the starlit hush of the ziggurat. The stone under your feet is still warm, holding the memory of the day's heat, and the streets of Babylon whisper in half-sleep. A donkey rustles in its pen. A lantern swings lazily outside a scribe's quarters. And above it all, the sky stretches out like a painted ceiling, black, boundless, and ancient. Tonight, your curiosity is tugged upward again, but this time not just at the stars themselves, but at what they meant to the people watching them. See, to a Babylonian, the sky was no passive thing. Every sparkle, every shimmer, every blink of starlight might have been a message. The gods didn't shout. They whispered. And they whispered in the constellations. You hear a voice behind a low mud brick wall, someone murmuring a prayer to Nabu, god of wisdom and writing. It's not just a hopeful chant, it's an invocation, a request that tonight's sky won't bring omens of famine, war, or royal drama. Because the heavens? They're a report card from the gods, and it all starts with the stars. Somewhere around 1800 BCE, Babylonian sky watchers began organizing the chaos above them into something they could name, tame, and maybe even predict. They linked stars into constellations, some familiar, some lost to time, and began the long process of decoding celestial signs. Now, don't picture modern constellations like Orion or Leo just yet. Babylonian constellations were rougher, less standardized. Some were asterisms, small star clusters that meant something symbolic. The furrow, for instance, is a line of stars we now call Virgo. But to them, it was associated with agriculture and fertility. A literal plowed field in the sky. They also had the old man, the plow, and my personal favorite, the wagon. Because, of course, why not imagine a sky full of carts? But here's the twist. Unlike the Greek tradition that painted myths across the stars, the Babylonians didn't always see stories up there. Sometimes a star was just a symbol, a marker, a thing that meant something rather than told something. And the planets? Those were the real gossip. They moved. Unlike the fixed stars that stayed obedient in their patterns, planets roamed. They broke the rules. And that meant they were gods, powerful, unpredictable, and slightly ominous. You pause at a shaded courtyard where a small group is gathered around a scribe. He holds up a clay tablet still drying in the moonlight. It's covered in rows of dots and lines, nothing elegant, but painstaking. The dots track the path of Jupiter over several months. The lines? They might indicate when the god Marduk is pleased, or when he's considering turning someone into a toad. That's not a joke. Well, mostly. You see, Jupiter wasn't just a planet. It was associated with Marduk, Babylon's top-tier deity, king of the gods. When Jupiter shone bright and steady, good things followed: harvests, victories, political marriages that didn't end in war. But when Jupiter flickered or wandered too far south, that was a divine eyebrow raise. Someone was in trouble. And let's not even talk about Mars, Nergal's planet. Nergal, god of war, plague, and all things hot and deadly. If Mars was acting up, you might as well start packing your bags or reinforcing the city walls. Still, not everything was doom and gloom. Venus, associated with Ishtar, was a more complicated read. Bright and beautiful as the morning star, it brought fertility, love, and desire. But also vengeance. Venus had a dual nature. Kind of like someone who's charming on a date and terrifying during an argument. This duality fascinated Babylonian astronomers. When Venus disappeared from the morning sky, it wasn't just astronomy, it was an omen. A vanishing goddess. A forewarning. Mainstream historical fact? The Venus tablet of Ammisaduqa, dated to around 1580 BCE, is one of the oldest known astronomical records. It documents the rising and setting of Venus over a 21-year period, and it's both stunning and weirdly obsessive. Quirky tidbit: some scholars believe the Babylonians tracked planetary behavior so religiously that they could predict solar eclipses, albeit roughly, using what's called the Saros cycle. That's 18 years and 11 days of watching shadows. And yes, they did this without a telescope. Just math and neck strain. But historians still argue whether the Babylonians truly believed the planets were causing events on Earth or whether they just saw them as warning signs. Like a canary in a coal mine. When Mars is mad, something's off, but it might not be Mars's fault. You find yourself back at the river's edge now, the water reflecting pinpoints of light. A boy sits nearby, tracing imaginary lines between stars with a stick in the sand. You watch him draw what looks like a goat, then a scorpion, then a fish with legs. You have to admit you don't quite see it, but the boy smiles. Because to him, the sky is a giant chalkboard of messages from above. The goat might mean a good harvest. The fish might signal floods. And that scorpion? Well, maybe it's just a scorpion. You lean back, letting your eyes drift across the constellations. There's something comforting in their permanence, even as the planets slink across the sky like secrets. And yet, beneath all this cosmic poetry, you realize that the Babylonians were practical. They didn't just gaze up and sigh, they wrote it down, copied it, archived it, compared notes across decades. They created a legacy of celestial records that modern scholars are still deciphering. They knew which planets wandered and when. They saw the repeat rhythms of the sky even if they didn't fully understand the mechanics. And they truly believed, that by watching the sky closely enough, maybe, just maybe, you could catch a glimpse of fate before it arrived. You close your eyes as a breeze from the Euphrates cools your face. Above you, Venus winks, then fades behind a cloud. You smile. Ishtar is playing coy tonight. You wake, or maybe you never quite fell asleep, still lying beneath that inky Babylonian sky. The stones around you hold the lingering heat of the day, and your ears pick up the rhythm of the city's breathing. A dog barking somewhere across the river, the creak of a reed basket being shifted, the faint, wet splash of a fisherman's oar. But above it all, there's the sky. Still watching, still moving. Tonight, you find yourself wandering into one of the temples, not the grand ziggurat from earlier, but a smaller, quieter place tucked into the corner of a district where scribes and priest astronomers live side by side. Here, in these dusty rooms, are the beating hearts of ancient stargazing. And on the floor? Clay. Endless slabs of sun-dried clay, some cracked, some fresh, some stacked neatly in bins that look more like baking trays than scientific archives. You step over one carefully and spot a few of the markings, rows of tiny cuneiform wedges organized with unsettling precision. They don't look like stories. They don't even look like language. They look like data. Welcome to the first astronomical archive. Here's the thing, the Babylonians weren't just tracking the stars for spiritual kicks. They were developing an entire system to record and analyze them. Not carved in stone, not painted on scrolls, but pressed into clay, the most ordinary, abundant, and surprisingly durable medium of their time. It may not sound glamorous, but let's be honest, how many of your own notes will last 3,000 years? In this room, you see one scribe hunched over a fresh slab of wet clay, tapping out what seems to be a table of lunar phases. Next to him, another examines a dried tablet, cross-checking the past with what's unfolding in the heavens now. And over in the corner, a young apprentice, barely into his teens, is desperately trying not to sneeze as he leans over a dusty pile of planetary logs. It's more than a ritual. It's a process, and it's beginning to look a lot like science. You kneel beside one of the older tablets, its corners rounded by time, its face cracked but readable. At the top are markings that represent dates in the Babylonian calendar. Below that, rows of symbols for the moon, the sun, and the 5 known planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Beside each, an annotation, not always legible, but sometimes shockingly specific: Jupiter stationary in the east, bright, good for barley. Or Mars appears redder than usual, bloodshed in Elam. There's a beautiful awkwardness to it all. Some entries are grand and ceremonial. Others feel like tired grocery list scribbles. But then you flip over one and see something that stops you, a set of symbols arranged in tight diagonal lines, almost as though someone's trying to represent movement on a flat surface. This isn't just note-taking. This is chart-making. Mainstream historical fact? Babylonian scholars, by the late 1st millennium BCE, were creating arithmetic schemes that could actually predict future planetary positions. One tablet, known today as Text A, plots the motion of Jupiter using a trapezoidal area diagram. That's basically graphing velocity over time, 1,400 years before Newton. Let that sink in. And the fringe detail? Some of these tablets also included symbols that resemble proto-astrological glyphs. One in particular, shaped like a curled fish or hook, appears repeatedly in association with Venus. No one knows exactly what it meant. Scholars still argue whether it was a divine nickname, an observational quirk, or someone doodling during a boring shift. You brush the dust off another slab and notice a small hole punched through the corner. Not decorative, practical. These tablets were meant to be strung together. Bound. Indexed. Babylonian scientists didn't just write, they filed. That's right. The first planetary tracking system may have come with its own DIY binder. A boy shuffles in with fresh clay from the riverside, kneading it into thick sheets with his elbows. Across the room, an elder scribe sighs and mutters as he smooths his stylus over a particularly stubborn corner of a chart. You can almost hear him grumble, "Mercury again?" This isn't just astronomy, it's bureaucracy. And yet, there's something noble in it. Every dot they pressed into this earth was a defiance of uncertainty. A quiet statement, "We see you, sky. We're paying attention." And here's what might really blow your sleepy mind, this archive? It was state-sponsored. That's right. Babylon's kings and rulers, particularly during the Neo-Babylonian and Seleucid periods, funded these observatories. Planet tracking wasn't a hobby. It was policy, because if you knew when the next eclipse would hit, maybe you could claim to have caused it. If you could predict when Venus would rise, maybe you could marry it to your political campaign. Or at the very least, delay a coronation until the sky said yes. Historians still argue whether these clay chartmakers thought of themselves as religious prophets or scientific thinkers, or both. The truth probably sat somewhere between obsessed temple geek and celestial PR consultant. Back outside, the night has ripened. You glance upward. Saturn hangs just over the rooftops, its pale glimmer steady and cool. You can almost hear an ancient priest mutter, "Good omen for crops, unless it flickers." A cat brushes past your ankle, yawning. You chuckle. Even in this ancient city, the cats go wherever they please. And as you return to your cot beside the temple wall, you take one last look at the sky. Not as a dreamer this time, but as a recorder. A small, sleepy part of a very large, very old system of watchers. Tomorrow, they'll press another mark into another slab. The planets will move. The clay will remember. And so will you. The temple bells aren't exactly gentle, but they do their job. You stir to the sound of a low, metallic chime rolling across the rooftops of Babylon. Dawn stretches pale orange across the river, and the smell of wet reeds and wood smoke curls through the air. Today's plan? We're skywatching. But now you're headed someplace a bit taller. You wind your way through early morning market stalls where sleepy vendors slap flies away from baskets of pomegranates and fish. Past the priest's garden, through a gate shaped like a lion's maw, and then there it is, the ziggurat. The heart of Babylon's obsession with the heavens. It rises in stacked levels, broad and heavy and almost smug-looking in the way it looms over the city. You climb its brick ramp slowly, each step crunching with centuries of dust. Higher and higher until the noise of the waking city fades behind you. Up here, it's just you, the wind, and the last clinging stars. This is the real observatory. Not a telescope or a telescope dome, just a high, wide platform open to the sky. And yet, from here, planetary observation became an institution. You're not alone. Two older priests are already up here, marking something on their clay slates. They nod as you approach, too focused to chat. One of them holds a gnomon, a kind of upright stick stuck into the ground, casting a long morning shadow. He squints, adjusts the angle, and makes a small note. "Shadow length longer than expected," he mutters. "Mercury's being difficult again." See, Babylonian astronomers didn't just track where the planets were at night. They were watching everything: shadows, alignments, odd lights, changes in brightness. Their notes weren't decorative, they were forensic. Take Mars, for example. You peer to the west where it still glows faint red, just about to dip below the horizon. In the Babylonian mind, that red tint wasn't just striking, it was a message. Mars was Nergal's eye. War, heat, disease. But only sometimes. Sometimes it meant nothing at all. That's the maddening beauty of Babylonian sky lore. Interpretation was everything. They had entire lists, manuals, almost called omen series, where different planetary behaviors were linked to possible events. Did Venus rise before sunrise and then vanish 3 days later? That might mean the king's advisor will fall ill, or not, because if it also rained that night, the meaning changed entirely. At a lunar eclipse? Now you're looking at a potential rebellion in the southern provinces. It was complicated. It was exhausting. It was basically a government spreadsheet written in clay. You flip through one of these omen tablets. They're not poetic. They're dense, dry, but weirdly hypnotic. If the moon becomes dark and Saturn is in the west and it rains, then the king will be safe. If Venus is bright in the east and the river floods, then famine may come unless the grain is full. There's something strangely modern about it, like a Babylonian version of correlation tables. One event doesn't equal another, but patterns matter. Probabilities, mainstream historical fact. The Enuma Anu-Enlil was a massive collection of these sky omens recorded on over 70 tablets. It covered everything from eclipses to cloud shapes. Some historians believe parts of it formed the foundation for later Hellenistic astrology. Quirky tidbit: the Babylonians occasionally included totally non-astronomical things in their omens. One tablet links the behavior of frogs, yes, frogs, to planetary signs. Croaking during a Venus rising? That might be significant. Historians still aren't sure if the frog entries were serious or an ancient inside joke. And still, scholars argue whether these observations were purely religious or part of an early attempt to apply empirical logic to repeated events. Were they connecting the dots by belief or by data? The truth, as usual, is a mix. From up here, the view is broad. The temples are tiny below you. The Euphrates glimmers in the early light. And the planets? They've done their dance again. Smooth. Predictable. Or are they? Because now one of the priests is grumbling. He's noticed something odd in the tablet's numbers. Mars has been off. Not wildly, just subtly. Too far north. Or moving too slowly. He presses his stylus into the clay, scribbling a correction, then mutters about recalculating the dates for the next offering. You peek at the table. Sure enough, there's a row of Mars positions that don't line up quite right with its normal arc. The planet seems to have slowed, curved backward a little, then resumed its course. Retrograde motion. To you, it's a known optical illusion. Mars appears to reverse course in the sky as Earth overtakes it in its orbit. But to the Babylonians, it was mysterious, worrisome, maybe meaningful. They documented it carefully, called it stationary or looping. They didn't understand the geometry, but they saw the pattern. And you? You're impressed, because this isn't just religion or superstition. This is observation-based pattern tracking without telescopes, without computers, without GPS. Just human eyes, steady hands, and soft clay. You sit beside a half-dried slab and add a mark of your own. Just a line, tiny wedge, a nod to those who kept watch over the sky, not for wonder, but for wisdom, and maybe, just maybe, for a little peace of mind. As the sun rises and the stars begin to fade, you descend the ziggurat slowly. The morning air is already heating. A fish vendor slaps a bundle of eels against his cart. A woman balances a jar of beer on her head, humming. Life below continues as it always has. But above? That ancient, shifting canvas, it's still moving, still writing its secrets. And somewhere, someone is still watching. The sun has settled, the shadows stretch long across the cobbled streets, and the air once again turns forgiving. The marketplace has quieted, except for a few final haggles and the occasional bark of a stubborn goat refusing to cooperate with dinner plans. You're moving slower now, worn out in the best way, from brick staircases, overheard debates, and the strange emotional weight of ancient math. But something's still on your mind. Something's been bothering you. Why? Did Mars look like it was moving backward? That loop, that retrograde movement, it stuck with you. Mars appears in the sky, tracks across it night by night, and then, inexplicably, reverses course for a time before heading back to its normal route. It's like watching someone walk past your house, pause, moonwalk for a week, then keep going like nothing happened. To you, in the modern world, the explanation is clear. Earth's faster orbit overtakes Mars, creating the illusion of reversal. But the Babylonians didn't have Kepler's laws or Newton's apples. What they had was diligence and clay, and somehow that was enough. You slip into a quieter district, residential but old money. There's a private shrine here, the kind maintained by scribes favored by the king. A short woman in her 50s, hair oiled and pinned high, waves you inside without speaking. She's focused on a set of planet logs spread out on a reed mat, her fingers carefully dusting the edges like they're sacred scrolls. And to her, they are. You sit beside her as she arranges the logs into neat rows. One log for each year. Each one has a pattern of dates, angles, planetary names, most notably Salbatanu, the Babylonian name for Mars. You notice the same symbol again and again, a curved wedge, indicating when Mars stops. Not disappears. Not flickers. Stops. She points at one of them, then draws in the air with her finger. You follow along as she recreates the path of Mars in the sky. Forward, pause, backward loop, pause again, then forward once more. This elegant, almost hypnotic, and then she says it, her only words of the night, spoken softly in Akkadian. The god looks over his shoulder. You feel it in your spine. To them, this wasn't just a celestial hiccup. It was a gesture. A god second-guessing, rethinking, or watching his enemies. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians grasped the geometrical illusion behind retrograde motion. Some believe they knew it was an illusion and didn't care. Others say they were happy to leave the why to the gods and just focus on predicting the when. Either way, they were the first to track it accurately, and that's no small feat. Mainstream historical fact: by the 5th century BCE, Babylonian astronomers had developed sophisticated ephemerides, tables of future planetary positions based on arithmetic, not just observed repetition. These tables could predict retrograde motion down to the day. Fringe tidbit: one clay tablet discovered in Uruk includes a small etching of a stick figure with what appears to be horns and a club standing beside Mars's name. Some believe it was a joke, Mars is cranky today. Others think it was a warning symbol for scribes too young to decode the numbers. You study the tablets under the oil lamp, mesmerized by the logic hiding in the symbols. There's a beauty here, fierce, orderly, confident. The chart doesn't explain the heavens, tames them. Even when the planets go rogue, Babylon tracks them down. Mars may backpedal, but the clay doesn't flinch. And remember, this wasn't being done in isolation. These charts were read by kings. Retrograde Mars could change policy. If the planetary data suggested unrest, cities might beef up their defenses, or offer sacrifices, or delay a coronation. The clay was power. And people who controlled it, the scribes, the priests, the sky watchers, had quiet authority far beyond their soft voices and dusty robes. The woman beside you finishes a tablet, then sets it gently on a tray of warm coals. It'll harden by dawn. Another mark of Mars's loop preserved forever. You leave quietly, stepping back into the night. And as you walk, you glance up, and there it is again. Mars, still red, still watching, still, maybe, drifting, the planet of war, of fever, of things left undone. You picture that looping path, one that would confuse sky watchers for centuries, one that challenged even the brightest minds in ancient Babylon, and you can't help but smile. Because while others saw a god hesitating, the Babylonians saw a pattern. They didn't need to know why Mars turned around. They only needed to know when. And by doing so, they claimed one of the greatest victories in early science. They wrestled meaning from chaos. You exhale as a cool breeze carries the scent of baked earth and wild mint. A temple bell rings low in the distance. A baby cries, and someone hushes it softly. Above you, Mars shines stubborn and slow. The god may look over his shoulder, but tonight, so do you. It's deep night again in Babylon, and the air hums with that peculiar stillness that only ancient cities possess, the kind of silence that isn't really silence at all, just the gentle overlap of distant voices, dogs shuffling in straw, and river water lapping against stone docks. You're seated cross-legged in a tucked-away chamber behind a temple's rear courtyard. Oil lamps line the clay walls, flickering gold and orange against soot-darkened brick. There's a faint sweetness in the air, probably myrrh or juniper resin being burned to ward off insects and, allegedly, curses. Tonight's lesson isn't about constellations or planetary loops. No, tonight you're here to see how planetary predictions can make or break a kingdom. And it starts with Saturn. Or, as the Babylonians called it, Ninurta's star. Saturn was seen as stern, deliberate, and deeply serious. It moved slowly, so slowly, in fact, that it became associated with stability, fate, and long-term consequences. Which sounds pretty noble until you realize if Saturn shifted slightly out of place, everyone panicked. You trace the grooves of a long, thin clay tablet resting on your lap. It's an omen report from decades ago, an especially tense one. According to the inscription, Saturn had lingered too long in the west, which was taken to mean one of two things. 1. A war would drag on longer than expected. 2. A trusted advisor would betray the king. Now, both of those are unsettling. But together, That's a nervous palace. You run your fingers over the script, imagining the scribe who pressed these wedges. Did his hand tremble? Was he worried his report would anger the court? Or did he, like so many others in this room, trust the signs more than the sword? The priest beside you speaks softly. He's older, voice raspy from years of inhaling oil smoke and reading under poor lighting. When Saturn moves slowly, he says, the gods are weighing something. Judgment is coming. You nod politely, but inside, you're thinking, what happens when people don't like what the sky says? That's when the fun begins, because Babylonian kings didn't just sit quietly and accept celestial bad news. They tried to outmaneuver the omens. Let's say Mars appears too red. That usually signals war. But if the army isn't ready, or if the king just signed a fragile treaty, the priesthood might delay the public reading of that omen. Or reframe it. Mars is red with pride, they might say. Our enemies are nervous. It's ancient spin control and it's brilliant. One king, likely Nabonidus, a ruler who adored omens and ignored most human opinions, allegedly delayed a military campaign by 2 full months due to an unfavorable sky alignment. He then staged a ritual substitution where a temporary dummy king was crowned in his place to absorb the bad celestial vibes. Yes, you heard that right. A fake king, dressed in royal garb, sat on the throne, gave commands, and then was quietly removed when the bad omens passed. Mainstream historical fact: this ritual, known as the substitute king ritual, was real. Texts from the Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian periods describe it in detail. It was believed that omens targeting the king could be tricked into striking a proxy instead. Fringe tidbit: one surviving letter suggests a substitute king once tried to make a run for it, literally escaping the palace dressed in his ceremonial robes. Whether he was caught or not, well, historians still argue whether that's myth or mishap. Either way, it's deliciously human. You lean back against the wall and imagine what it must have felt like to be a priest in charge of these readings. The clay chart says the gods are frowning. The king says, try again. You've got Saturn creeping across the southern sky and a calendar full of holy days to manage. And you still have to file your omen report before sunrise. These omen reports were structured. Formal. They'd include the observed planetary behavior, the date, the corresponding signs, clouds, animal births, dreams, etc., and a final conclusion. Sometimes it was vague, but other times it was chillingly specific. Like this one: Saturn low and slow in the east. A great man will fall, his city left in smoke. But the successor will rebuild stronger. You wonder how often those predictions came true. Then again, with enough imagination and time, almost anything can feel accurate in hindsight. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were truly believed or were more about legitimizing political decisions. Did kings wait for the stars? Or did they ask the stars to approve choices already made? Probably both. In one temple archive, a rare and signed clay tablet contains several rejected omens, predictions that never made it to the court. Some were scratched out. Others were never fired. One even ends mid-sentence. It's like a celestial editing room. Too negative, too vague. Save for after the festival. You smirk. Even in the ancient world, someone always managed the message. Outside, a cloud slides over the moon, casting shifting shadows across the wall. You squint up at the stars as Saturn blinks low over the horizon. Slow, thoughtful, dangerous. You imagine yourself as a king for a moment. The stars warn you of betrayal. A loyal general eyes your throne a bit too long. The priests grow quiet. Would you trust the clay, the gods, or your own instinct? Maybe all three, because in Babylon, planetary charts weren't just records. They were negotiations with the divine, and sometimes those negotiations came with consequences. You rise slowly, careful not to knock over any half-dried tablets. Your joints pop somewhat loudly. The priest looks up and smiles knowingly. You've been sitting too long, he says. You nod. But really, you've just been thinking too long. Thinking about power, belief, and how a few tiny symbols in a chunk of clay could guide the fate of entire empires. As you step outside, the night wind brushes your cheeks, cooler now. Calmer. The river glows faintly in the moonlight. Somewhere, a guard changes shift with a clatter of sandals. Above it all, Saturn watches. Still slow. Still silent. And still somehow in charge. There's a strange comfort in routine, especially ancient ones. You're walking the perimeter of the temple precinct now, bare feet scuffing against the cool bricks. Each morning and evening, the priest astronomers repeat the same pattern: climb, observe, record. Adjust the calculations. Recheck the shadow lengths. Store the tablets. Feed the gods. But tonight, you're heading somewhere special, a place few outsiders are ever invited to visit. Down a long corridor, past a pair of disinterested guards with far too many earrings, and through a low archway, you arrive in the astronomer's archive. Not the public collection. The private one. The real one. The door is carved with stars, deliberately, mathematically. There are 6 rows, each with a different number of dots. And if you pause long enough, you realize something. They aren't random. They're a star map. The door opens. Inside, it's dim and musty. The scent of old papyrus and baked clay fills your nose. This isn't a place of ceremony. It's a vault of raw knowledge. Shelves line the walls, filled with stacked tablets, some tiny as your hand, others the size of paving stones. They're categorized in ways only these temple scribes understand. By planet, by cycle, by dynasty. And in the center, on a large stone table, lies the crown jewel, a Babylonian mull. Apin tablet. Mull. Apin, the plow, isn't just an omen list or a moon phase chart. It's the Babylonian Sky Bible, a masterwork of observation, organization, and, somehow, astronomical philosophy. You lean in. The text is dense, broken into tight lines of wedge marks, but the scribe beside you is happy to explain. Or at least, mumble quietly while gesturing at various bits like a tour guide who's lost interest. The mull. Apin details fixed stars, seasonal constellations, planetary periods, calendar corrections, and lunar eclipses. It maps out the sky in 3 paths: the path of Anu, the equator; the path of Enlil, northern sky; and the path of Ea, southern sky. These divisions aren't scientific in the modern sense, but they work. Even now, parts of the mull. Apin tablet remain shockingly accurate. Mainstream historical fact: the mull. Apin compilation likely dates to around 1000 BCE, but the knowledge it contains is far older, some of it perhaps reaching back into the 2nd millennium BCE. It's one of the most complete and organized ancient star catalogs ever discovered. Quirky tidbit: the text includes instructions for how to determine whether a lunar eclipse is a bad omen for the king or just for the grain harvest. The rule: if the eclipse begins on the right side of the moon, the king is safe. On the left, start sharpening the royal scapegoat. You gently trace one of the star paths etched into the clay. The Babylonians saw the constellations not as static wallpaper but as seasonal companions. Some appeared only in winter. Some heralded the rains. Others, like the constellation known as the Great Twins, signaled that the festival season was near. The priest flips to another tablet, this one worn, its corners chipped. It's a star calendar, and it's organized not by month but by heliacal rising. That's when a star first becomes visible just before sunrise, having been lost in the sun's glare for weeks. This method allowed Babylonians to time agricultural seasons, religious festivals, even the timing of taxes. Yes, you heard right. The sky not only told you when to plant wheat, it told you when to pay your silver. You can almost hear some exhausted farmer muttering, "Curse you, Jupiter," as a tax collector holds up a clay receipt marked with planetary glyphs. Historians still argue whether these stellar guides were meant to predict or simply order time. But either way, the result was the same. Babylonian society ran on astronomical timekeeping. And it wasn't just stars and seasons. The tablet before you contains one of the earliest known references to the zodiac. Not the full Greek-style horoscope wheel, but the beginnings, divisions of the sky into regular parts, each ruled by a star cluster or constellation. 12 signs. Sound familiar? It's like watching history form itself from raw clay beneath your fingertips. As the scribe carefully replaces the mull Apin in its slot, you glance to the far wall. There's something odd there, half hidden under a cloth. You lift it gently and find a star globe or what passes for one. It's a hollow clay sphere, carefully incised with constellations and narrow grooves. No one knows exactly how it was used, maybe for teaching, maybe for ritual, but it's undeniably a 3D model of the night sky, and it's 2,700 years old. You sit back, slightly dazed. These people didn't just name stars or worship them, they systematized them. They created a framework that would influence Greek astronomy, Islamic observatories, and yes, your high school math teacher's obsession with degrees and minutes. All of it right here, in this dim clay vault. With no computers, no satellites, no magnetic chalkboards. Just eyes, fingers, patience, and a stubborn refusal to let the sky win. You step outside just before dawn. The stars are already fading. A dog trots by, ears flopping. A boy chases after it, laughing. Above you, the constellation of the Lion is just barely visible, tucked between the last shadows of night. In Babylon, that meant midsummer, and also that the royal grain stores should be checked. You're not sure how that connects, but you like that it does. You walk the long path back to the river's edge, thinking not of gods or kings, but of scribes, of the endless quiet tapping of styluses on wet clay, of people who chose to watch, to record, to preserve, and somehow, against all odds, they succeeded. The stars continue to move, but thanks to them, you no longer feel lost beneath them. The day drifts onward, slow and drowsy. Heat clings to every surface in Babylon. Clay walls radiate warmth like old kettles, and the river glints in dazzling silver as if trying to fry your eyes. You retreat into shade wherever you can find it, sipping watered beer in quiet courtyards, pressing a damp cloth to your neck, and wondering how on earth these people managed long division in this heat. But even now, the sky work continues. This afternoon, you're invited, well, more like ushered with a firm, silent nod, into a special chamber tucked within the House of Tablets. Not a grand observatory, not a shrine. This room looks more like a math tutor's lair, which is exactly what it is, because here, under a low ceiling strung with hanging reeds, Babylonian scribes are doing something shocking for their time. They are performing astronomical calculations using abstract mathematics. Wait, let's pause. You probably assumed most ancient stargazers just watched, recorded, maybe chanted a few lines to the moon, then called it a night. But in this particular period, especially by the 4th century BCE, Babylonians began to do something wildly ahead of their era. They calculated planetary positions using math alone, not just estimating, not just marking bright or dim. They used numerical techniques that, centuries later, would form the basis of modern astronomical models. And they did it with clay. You sit cross-legged beside a quiet young man who looks like he hasn't slept since last full moon. His tablet is covered in columns of numbers, arrows, and curious zigzag symbols. He's murmuring under his breath, stylus tapping against his chin. He's not just copying from the sky, he's predicting it. And here's how they did it. Instead of relying only on cycles or visual observation, Babylonian scribes began to model planetary motion using intervals, regular differences between positions over time. They'd record how many days a planet took to reach its brightest point, how long it paused in retrograde, and how quickly it moved during specific phases. They didn't graph curves like Greek geometers. Instead, they divided time into chunks and modeled how a planet's speed changed within those chunks. Mainstream historical fact: the so-called System A and System B models were used in Babylon to calculate the motions of planets, the moon, and eclipses. System A used step functions, discrete changes. System B used linear interpolation, a kind of average rate. This was centuries before calculus. One tablet from Uruk even uses a geometric shape, a trapezoid, to calculate the area under a curve representing Jupiter's changing velocity. Historians only fully grasped this in the 21st century, when high-res scans finally revealed the model's sophistication. Fringe tidbit: a clay tablet labeled BM40054 was initially thought to be a tax record. Turns out, it's a lunar calculation so precise it predicts the moon's speed changes across its orbit. Whoops. Sorry, tax collectors. You peek at the young scribe's clay slate. He's working on Mercury, tricky business. Mercury appears briefly near the horizon at dawn or dusk, often disappearing for days. It's elusive, erratic, and in Babylonian terms, a pain in the backside, though they probably phrased it more respectfully. Still, he's not discouraged. He adds a number, adjusts another, presses his stylus down with a satisfying thunk. He knows where Mercury will be in 43 days, even if clouds block the view. That's the miracle here. For the first time in history, humans are not just observing the heavens, they are modeling them abstractly. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians understood the models as literal or just tools. Did they know these numbers described curves in space? Or were they simply satisfied that the numbers worked? It might not matter. You ask a quiet question. The scribe shrugs. We do not see the gods, he says. But we see their footprints. That'll stay with you. Because here in this stuffy, sun-drenched room, you're witnessing a transition, one of the great shifts in human thought. The moment when celestial behavior went from mystery to math. No, they didn't have ellipses or inertia or orbital resonance. But they had systems. Logic. Patterns tracked so carefully that the planets could no longer surprise them. And what's more, they didn't stop there. Many Babylonian tablets contain corrections. Notes in the margins. Better value next year. Jupiter rose late. A just equation. These scribes weren't locked into dogma. They updated their models even when the gods weren't cooperating. One scribe even added a side note saying, essentially, this value doesn't make sense, but it matches the sky, so we'll use it for now. That my sleepy friend is science. You stretch your arms as the room grows darker. The scribes are still working, still scratching clay, still rechecking positions. You quietly take your leave, ducking through a low doorway and blinking into the amber sunset. It's cooler now. The first stars blink on above the rooftops, and you realize something. You've stopped looking at the stars like decorations. You now see them as data points. You know which planet is which. You even vaguely understand why Mercury is late tonight. You smirk. Not bad for someone who, just a few days ago, thought planetary ephemeris sounded like an exotic flower. You wander toward the river, arms behind your head, letting your feet find the path. Fishermen light lanterns. The water shimmers with orange light. Somewhere nearby, someone sings. You look up at Jupiter, bright, slightly southeast of where it was last night. You whisper the interval in your head. It's off by a day, but you'll forgive it. After all, even the gods need room to wander. You're getting good at this. You can feel it in your bones now, how the planets move, how the scribes think, how the rhythm of ancient Babylon isn't just in its streets, but in the skies. It's not just observation anymore, it's a kind of fluency. Tonight, as you cross through the western gardens of the temple complex, you barely notice the chirp of crickets or the soft rustle of date palms in the wind. Your eyes are drawn upward. Venus has returned. There she is, blinding and beautiful in the western sky. The evening star. The one the Babylonians called Dilbat, daughter of the goddess Ishtar. A planet so bright, so unmistakable, it was given a double life as both morning star and evening star. And oh, did they watch her closely, because Venus was more than just a light in the sky. She was timing itself. The great calibrator. You settle into a courtyard filled with incense smoke and low cushions. A priestess of Ishtar, face veiled, voice soft, reads from a ceremonial tablet. It's not an omen report, but a calendar reading, and Venus features in almost every line. For the Babylonians, Venus's movements were used to determine agricultural cycles, ritual days, and royal decisions. She would disappear behind the sun, vanish for days, then reappear, first in the morning, later in the evening. Every stage had its own meaning, every phase a potential signal. Mainstream historical fact? The Venus tablets of Ammisaduqa are one of the oldest surviving astronomical documents recording the rise and set times of Venus for over 20 years. Dated around 1650 BCE, they reveal an obsession with Venus's 8-year cycle. Because here's what they discovered: without computers, without optics, without calculators, Venus repeats its pattern almost perfectly every 8 years. Rise date, disappearance, reappearance. It all loops like celestial choreography in an almost musical cycle. You sip from a shallow bowl of barley water and nod slowly. That kind of precision, in a world lit by fire and guesswork, is nothing short of magic. Except it's not magic. It's memory. It's measurement. But here's where things get weird. One of the tablets on the priestess's lap lists not just dates, but outcomes. Venus disappears for 3 days. Good for harvest. Venus appears low in the west, war in the east. Venus too bright, childbirth will be difficult. You glance over her shoulder. Some of the entries are marked with a clay stamp, others not. The stamped ones? Those are confirmed. Matched with historical events. Like a cosmic Yelp review. Yes, that omen came true, for stars would predict again. And just when you think it's all orderly and rational, someone brings out the dream book. That's right. The Babylonians didn't just watch Venus, they dreamed of her. And they took those dreams seriously. Quirky tidbit? One tablet lists a dream where a man sees Venus swimming in the river. The interpretation? His wife will leave him, but he will gain a vineyard. Historians still argue whether these dream texts were symbolic, literal, or just a kind of sky poetry. But one thing is clear. Venus, more than any other planet, was personal. She was the face people searched for after dusk. The omen of change. the signal that something was about to shift, be it crops, love, or the weather. And if she disappeared early? Panic. One king is said to have delayed a royal wedding because Venus wasn't visible the night before. Another postponed a military campaign by 3 weeks due to an incomplete Venus cycle. In both cases, priests recalculated, scrambled their charts, and reperformed rituals to reset the clock. And if that failed? They blamed clouds. You lean back, tracing Venus with your eyes. She's brighter than Jupiter tonight, soft white fire hanging just above the palm trees. And you understand now what the Babylonians saw. Not just light, not just a planet, a pulse. Venus was a heartbeat, measured in light, cycles, silence, and return. One of the scribes beside you picks up a reed stylus and begins carving a fresh tablet. It's a simple entry. Tonight's visibility, timing, brightness. But before he finishes, he pauses, looks up, looks again, then writes something extra, a note. You lean in. It reads, Dilbat rose low as if reluctant. Storms may come. You smile, because that line, that's not science. That's intuition. 1,000 years before telescopes, someone trusted their gut and etched it in clay. The fire in the courtyard crackles. A dog yawns. A child asks to hear the story of Ishtar's descent again. The priestess begins to recite it, voice like water over stone, and Venus waits above you, holding position, watching. You whisper her name once under your breath. Not Dilbat, not Ishtar, just Venus, and somehow it feels like she hears you. There's a hush tonight that's different from the others. You can't quite place it. Maybe it's the way the wind avoids the courtyards, or how the temple guards have stopped exchanging bored jokes. Even the cats, usually so bold at night, keep to the shadows. Something's coming, and not from the streets. You're told to wait near the main ziggurat, just below the stairwell that rises into the dark like a spine. A priest, young, unblinking, approaches with a small wax tablet. No words, just a single glyph drawn in bold lines. Crescent moon, half-eaten, darkening. Tonight is eclipse night. The air itself feels aware of it. You follow the scribe in silence, past burning incense, past restless oxen chained tighter than usual, past a group of scribes who've paused mid-calculation to simply watch. Because this isn't just an event, it's a reckoning. In Babylon, eclipses weren't awe-inspiring natural events. They were omens of disruption, especially when they covered the moon. The moon, or sin, was a vital, steady presence. And when sin dimmed, so did the confidence of kings. Mainstream historical fact? Babylonian astronomers could predict lunar eclipses with startling accuracy. They used the Saros cycle, roughly 18 years long, to track and anticipate when the moon would enter Earth's shadow. These predictions show up on dozens of tablets, proving they weren't just reacting, they were forecasting. Quirky tidbit? Sometimes they held special anti-omen rituals during an eclipse. One involved tying a live goat to a clay image of the king, then burying the whole package under a threshold to absorb the darkness. Animal rights activists cover your ears. You climb the stairs of the ziggurat just as the moon begins to fade. It's not dramatic at first, just a bite missing. But you feel the crowd tense below. Priests whisper. Scribes blink faster. You settle near the top, close enough to the star priest who's scratching furious notes onto a half-dried tablet. You peek. There it is. Moon enters shadow, second watch west of a news path. Saturn is low. Danger for the northern fields. These people aren't thinking poetry. They're thinking policy. Because depending on which part of the moon disappears first, which planet is visible nearby, and how long the eclipse lasts, the meaning shifts. Is this a sign of plague? Rebellion? A curse on barley? A dead prince? The moon darkens further. You glance up, and now it's undeniable. A blood moon, dark red, hanging low, silent and impossible to ignore. You swear, even the bricks under your feet feel colder. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians truly believed the gods were fighting during eclipses or if the rituals were just tradition, spiritual insurance in case the sky was feeling moody. One thing is certain. They recorded every detail. The color, the shadow's shape, how long it lasted, what else was in the sky, whether the dogs barked. Because if there's one thing Babylonians understood, it's that meaning doesn't always come in thunderclaps. Sometimes it comes in data. One tablet from the reign of King Esarhaddon lists 3 eclipses in a single year, each followed by specific outcomes: a famine, a court scandal, and the collapse of a dam. Whether these were cause or coincidence, no one knows. But the pattern? It mattered. You glance behind you and see a priest kneeling beside a flame, whispering words over a bronze bowl filled with river water. The moon is reflected on the surface. The ripple of the water mirrors the bite of the eclipse. He dips a reed in, stirring once, then pours the bowl over a stack of straw effigies. He's soaking the sins, distracting the shadows. Maybe both. And then, almost like a sigh, the red begins to fade. The moon returns. Not all at once, but in slow, white breath. You realize something strange. People start moving again. Talking softly. Laughing. A priest shakes out his sleeves. One scribe high-fives another with clay-stained palms. You're not even sure they know what a high-five is, but they invent one just for tonight. The danger has passed. The sky has forgiven. And now the records will be sealed. A tablet pressed with tonight's details. Stored in the Eclipse archive, another quiet entry in the long ledger of cosmic warnings. One priest whispers to another, "It was a good eclipse. No omens stuck." You blink. You didn't know omens could stick. But now that you think about it, yeah, some nights cling more than others. You descend the ziggurat slowly, feet brushing against dust kicked up from 1,000 years of watchers. The moon glows calm and pale behind you, trying hard to look like nothing happened. But you know better. You pass a clay slab in the temple courtyard bearing the inscription of an ancient eclipse. It reads, "The moon dimmed. The earth did not." And you wonder how many kings slept uneasily under that same red light. How many offerings were made? How many policies changed? How many enemies were blamed? And how many scribes just smiled and said, "Told you so." You glance up one last time. The moon is full again. So are you. You wake to the sound of bells, soft, distant, and oddly soothing. Not alarm bells. These are ceremonial, rung not for danger, but for timing. It's sunrise and the city breathes in deeply. Merchants begin laying out wares, temple guards switch shifts with a grumble, and pigeons perform their daily war against statues that didn't ask for this life. The scent of baking bread curls through the alleys, and you, bleary-eyed and clay-dusty, are being led somewhere new. Not the observatory. Not the archives. Today you're going into the calendar room. It's less majestic than it sounds. Really, it's just a square chamber tucked beside the temple's east wing, lined with narrow shelves stacked with small clay tablets. But these aren't planetary charts or omen reports. They're date logs, the heartbeat of the Babylonian year. This is where the universe becomes a schedule, and not just any schedule. Cosmic to-do list. You ease into a stool beside a woman who is so calm and so focused she barely notices you. Her job? She's the calendar keeper, and this morning she's coordinating the official lunisolar calendar for the temple's upcoming events. That's right, lunisolar, because Babylonian timekeeping didn't rely on just one celestial body. They used both the moon and the sun to measure time. A complicated dance, and one that required constant corrections. Mainstream historical fact: the Babylonian calendar was primarily lunar. Months began with the first visible crescent moon. But to keep it aligned with the solar year, they periodically added intercalary months, extra months, sort of like cosmic leap years. These adjustments were often determined by temple officials using both observations and celestial predictions. Quirky tidbit: one calendar from the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II includes a side note complaining that the moon was hidden by mist on the first day of a month. So the officials declared 2 first days just to be safe. A bureaucratic nightmare. But hey, better than angering the gods. You watch as the calendar keeper updates a festival listing. She checks the moon's cycle against a table of solar longitudes, making sure the New Year festival won't drift too far from the spring equinox. It's precise, sacred, and also deeply practical, because in Babylon, everything is scheduled around the heavens. Festivals, taxes, trade agreements, crop rotations, even court hearings. Want to settle a land dispute? Better not do it on the 14th of Nisanu. That's when Ishtar descends and tempers rise. Need to pay a debt? Make sure it doesn't fall during the 3-day lunar dark. Aina Sapatu. When the moon hides and justice is said to be unreliable, this is more than tracking time. This is living inside a cosmic rhythm. Historians still argue whether the calendar's intercalary adjustments were strictly astronomical or also influenced by politics. Was that extra month in the 9th year really because the moon demanded it, or because the king needed more time to collect taxes? You're inclined to believe both. The calendar keeper pauses to sip something hot and strange, possibly barley tea, possibly potion, and then shows you one of the most curious tablets yet. It's a forecast calendar not of stars, but of events. Not predictions exactly, but patterns drawn from history. On the 12th of Ayaru, 3 years in a row, the Tigris flooded. On the 21st of Tashertu, pigs got mysteriously sick in 4 neighboring districts. The note, prepare selves. Do not sell smoked fish. It's data-driven superstition. Or maybe superstition-driven data. Either way, it worked. Because in Babylon, memory wasn't just a story. It was a metric. You trace a line on the tablet, a month's worth of symbols. Some marked with stars, some with skulls, some with curled snakes. Each glyph carries meaning: feast day, plague memory, famine risk, eclipse echo. This calendar isn't just planning the future. It's remembering the past, and then the most human moment of all. The calendar keeper sighs. She squints at the tablet, leans back, and mutters, the barley tax overlaps with the Ishtar procession again. We'll never get good attendance. Some things never change. You leave the room slowly, blinking at the brightness of the late morning. The city is fully alive now, ox carts squeaking, children playing near irrigation ditches, vendors hollering about cucumbers and dates. But as you walk, you notice the rhythm beneath it all. The merchants know when to open. The priests know when to pray. Even the city's animals seem to operate on some hidden signal. You glance up. The crescent moon is just barely visible in the sky. Faint, delicate, a whisper behind the sun's brilliance. It's not much, but it's enough to set the day. And that's what Babylonian astronomy ultimately did. It gave people structure. It made the terrifying randomness of nature feel like a timetable. Storms came and went. Kings rose and fell. Crops failed. Debts mounted, dreams disappointed. But the moon returned. And so did the calendar. You exhale as a palm frond shudders in the breeze. It's market day. And thanks to someone's scratched-in note 3 months ago, the fish vendors are offering discounts. Because Venus was in the west. Because the moon arrived on time. Because someone, somewhere, kept the sky honest. You wake before dawn this time. Not because of bells, not because someone shook your shoulder, but because of the quiet. A kind of anticipatory silence, like the sky holding its breath. You step outside. The stars are still visible. Orion's belt gleams faintly above the rooftops, but the horizon glows a soft bruise purple. And there, just above the river, is Mercury, the elusive one. The messenger. The planet that slips in and out of view like it's hiding a secret. You stare at it for a long moment. Slow, shy, but unmistakable. The priests will be happy. It means the records will be full today. And today, of all days, that matters. Because today, you're not just watching stars. You're going to chart them. You follow a winding staircase that leads to the temple's upper platform, where the sky feels closer and the air smells faintly of burnt cedar. Up here, the scribes are preparing a new clay chart. It's long and rectangular, freshly pressed and drying in the early morning cool. This isn't just an observation tablet. It's a charting tablet, a record that will eventually be used for prediction. You settle in beside a young scribe with a short braid and ink stains on her knuckles. She nods politely, then returns to her calculations. You glance over. The top of the tablet reads, MUL 4th year, month I, 3rd watch. It's a date, but also a position in the grand dance of stars. She's tracking the position of Mars. Mainstream historical fact? Babylonian astronomers regularly tracked the movement of the 5 known planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, over fixed star backgrounds. They used rising and setting points, brightness levels, retrograde motion, and intervals of visibility to build detailed ephemerides, schedules of celestial positions. These charts allowed them to forecast appearances years in advance. Mars, in particular, fascinated them. Its reddish glow, its unpredictable loops in the sky, its ominous association with war. They even gave it a name that sounds like trouble, Nergal's star, named after the god of destruction and plague. Today, Mars is mid-retrograde. That means it's going backward across the sky. Of course, it's not actually reversing, just an illusion caused by Earth overtaking Mars in its orbit. But to the Babylonians, this backward movement was one of the most mysterious behaviors in the heavens. Quirky tidbit? There's a clay tablet in the Sapar archive that records Mars appearing redder than usual, moving like a drunk ox. The conclusion: the border will be breached from the south. The next year, that exact thing happened. Coincidence? Maybe. But that tablet got copied and recopied for centuries. The scribe beside you pauses to tap her stylus against the clay. She points at a small wedge with a slightly thicker base. Retrograde marker, she says. This one's wide, it means slower motion. You nod, pretending you totally understand. And then she does something brilliant. She holds up a different tablet, one from 2 years ago, and overlays it. The position of Mars is almost identical, but the date is different by just under 780 days. That's Mars's synodic period, the time it takes to return to the same place in the sky relative to Earth. They didn't know the orbital mechanics, but they measured the pattern. Historians still argue whether these charts were used purely for astrology or also to aid temple logistics. But the detail in them? It's not ornamental. It's operational. She hands you a stylus and motions to a corner of the tablet. Your turn. Your palms sweat. You press a small wedge near the retrograde arc. It's not perfect, a little crooked, but it's yours. A tiny dent in the clay that will dry with the rest. You just contributed to a celestial record thousands of years in the making. As the morning wears on, more scribes arrive. Some work on Venus charts, others are deep in lunar phase tables. One older man is scribbling something about Jupiter's apparent diameter, adjusting an entry for brightness level based on dew conditions. You lean back and stare upward. Mars is still visible, pale and ghostly in the early light. You trace its path in your mind. Rising, slowing, reversing, pausing, leaping forward again. It's poetic, like a stubborn god refusing to walk straight. You ask a passing priest if Mars always moves the same way. He smirks. No planet behaves the same way twice, he says. But they all come home eventually. You like that. As noon arrives, the clay tablets are left in a shaded corridor to dry. You walk past them, counting rows of symbols like a sleepy librarian. Each wedge a planet. Each gap a pause. Each curve a mystery solved or at least named. A few of the scribes are muttering over a weird discrepancy in Saturn's current position. It's a half day off. They argue quietly, maybe a cloudy night skewed the last observation. Maybe the last scribe forgot to adjust for the festival delay. Maybe Saturn's just messing with them. Historians still debate whether these errors were frequent or rare. Most tablets show remarkable consistency, but a few contain crossed-out lines, over-scratched corrections, or, your favorite, a single word etched with aggressive pressure, again, as if the sky was being difficult on purpose. You sit in the corridor's shade, watching the clay harden. This is the end of the charting process. The marks will stay now, immutable, official. Next month, a new tablet will begin. And the dance continues. The sun moves overhead. The scribes yawn. Someone plays a reed flute nearby badly, but with feeling. The air smells of warmed earth and roasted lentils. And you, gazing at Mars's retrograde loop, feel an odd peace. Because now you understand that this ancient science wasn't about dominance. It wasn't about conquering the sky or bending it to human will. It was about syncing with it, listening to it, matching its breath, so the stars could tell you when to plant, and when to wait, and when to just sit in the shade with a clay tablet and chart a god's red footsteps across the sky. By now, your sandals are worn smooth. The clay dust clings permanently to your clothes, and you've developed the unconscious habit of glancing upward every few minutes, just to check what the sky is doing. You've officially gone native. Today, the temple feels slower. Not in a lazy way, but in the calm, methodical pace of people preparing for something big. There's talk of a royal visit, whispers of new scrolls arriving from Elam, and more unusually, a new omens compilation being prepared. You're curious, of course. You've seen astronomical records, eclipse logs, Venus phase charts. But this is different. This is the realm of the celestial omen lists, and today you're invited to help copy one. Let's get one thing clear. In Babylon, omens aren't superstition in the modern sense. They're not silly signs or vague feelings. They're part of a system, one as organized and obsessive as any planetary chart. A whole branch of Babylonian astronomy is dedicated to connecting sky events to earthly consequences. It's called Enuma Anu-Enlil, and it is massive. Mainstream historical fact? The Enuma Anu-Enlil is a collection of around 70 tablets and thousands of entries compiled over centuries. It's one of the most comprehensive divination texts in history, linking phenomena like eclipses, planetary behavior, star visibility, and even cloud shapes to specific outcomes, usually for kings, crops, or empires. Quirky tidbit? One omen reads, if a halo surrounds the moon and Jupiter stands within it, an enemy of the king will die. Another one says, if Venus is visible in the morning and a goat bleats, there will be locusts. Science? Debatable. But systematic? Absolutely. You're seated at a broad, low table beside two scribes and a cranky temple librarian. He's got one eye on the stylus and one eye on you, clearly trying to determine if you're worthy of even breathing near his precious clay records. You are handed a fresh tablet and asked to copy. If Mars stands in the path of Anu and a comet is seen in the south, pestilence will fall on the livestock of the western province. You blink. That's oddly specific. You press the stylus carefully, mimicking the angle of each wedge. The scribe nods, satisfied. But before you finish, he leans over and adds something to the corner of your tablet. A tiny bird glyph. Personal annotation, he says. What does it mean, you ask? He shrugs. It means I saw that once. It came true. You pause. It's one thing to see patterns in the stars. It's another to believe they're talking back. But in this room, surrounded by clay and candlelight, that idea doesn't seem so strange. Historians still argue whether these omens were believed literally or simply used as rhetorical tools. Did kings really cancel campaigns based on star omens? Or did they use the stars to justify decisions they'd already made? Either way, the impact is undeniable. A single ominous eclipse could delay a royal coronation. A strange star near Saturn might halt a trade deal. And a double rainbow at dawn, don't laugh, could prompt a change in temple leadership. You move on to a new entry. If Venus disappears from the sky for 3 days and a dog gives birth to a snake, plague will come from the north. You glance sideways. Did that really happen? The librarian chuckles. The dog part? Doubtful. The Venus part? Definitely. You keep copying. Each omen is like a miniature poem. Cosmic haiku. Sometimes terrifying, sometimes oddly beautiful. If lightning strikes during the month of Tashritu and no stars are seen for 3 nights, kings will quarrel, but none will win. If a red star stands in the south and the moon rises late, grain will be late but plentiful. These tablets aren't just predictions. They're a way of paying attention. Because if the gods speak, surely they do so in patterns, right? That's the Babylonian theory, at least. And you begin to see the logic. In a world where droughts kill, rivers flood, empires clash, and plague travels faster than news, any edge is welcome, especially one written in the sky. One of the scribes begins categorizing the tablets by planet. Mars omens here, Saturn omens there. You help him sort. There's a strange comfort in it, like putting books back on a shelf after a storm. You find an older entry, chipped and faint. If no planet is visible for 3 nights, and the moon is late, and the priests dream of snakes, an old enemy will return. You hold it in your hands, trying to guess who it referred to. A rival king? A banished official? A long-ignored mistake? Maybe all 3. As the afternoon wanes, you help stack the finished tablets on wooden racks to dry. The room smells like wax, ink, and clay. A child peeks in, giggles at your dirt-smudged hands, and vanishes down the hallway. You hear someone tuning a lyre in the distance. You leave the temple feeling heavier and wiser, because now you understand that for the Babylonians, the sky wasn't just a scientific curiosity. It was a narrator, and the story it told depended on who was reading it. You pass an old woman tending herbs by a shrine. She hums as she works. Above her, Jupiter glows faintly in the rising dusk. You wonder what story he's telling tonight, and who's listening. The sun rises to the sound of scraping. You hear it before you even open your eyes, sharp, rhythmic, deliberate. Not chiseling, not hammering. It's the sound of stylus on clay repeated 1,000 times over. A temple courtyard has been turned into a production site. Today, you're witnessing something special. Not a new chart. Not another omen list. Something far more ambitious. They're making a celestial catalog. You shuffle toward the edge of the courtyard, still yawning, still blinking sleep from your eyes. Rows of low benches stretch across the space, and every single one is occupied by scribes hunched over drying tablets. Behind them, shelves grown with hardened records, star names, rising times, durations, declinations. You're surrounded by an ancient database. This is the temple's attempt to map the stars. All of them, and it's enormous. Mainstream historical fact? The Babylonians compiled detailed star catalogs over generations. The most famous is the MUL.Appen series, 2 tablets listing dozens of constellations, star names, seasonal risings, and astronomical phenomena. Dated to at least 1000 BCE, these texts represent one of the oldest known attempts at systematic astronomy. You're handed a cracked copy of the MUL.Appen and asked to help verify an entry. You squint at the wedge marks in red. The star of the plow rises in the month of Shabbatu, in the east, just before dawn. It refers to what we now call Auriga, a northern constellation. But here, it's not just a set of stars. It's a clock hand. Each star was a tool, a marker, a sign. If it rose early, harvest would start sooner. If it was late, The king might delay his speech. It's timekeeping, yes, but also philosophy. Quirky tidbit? One Babylonian tablet gives weather predictions based on star visibility. If the fox star appears pale and flickering, expect wind. If the jaw star rises red, dust storms. Who needs meteorology when you've got sky gossip? The head scribe, a wiry man with ink in his fingernails and dust in his beard, motions you toward a wall chart. It's hand-painted in red and black and depicts 3 major star paths: the path of Enlil, north, the path of Anu, central, and the path of Ea, south. These paths are zones of the sky, divided to keep track of seasonal star movements. And today, they're verifying the boundaries. The scribes are double-checking if Pabelsag, what we now call Sagittarius, should belong to Enlil or Anu's path. There's debate. Heated, stylus-snapping debate. You never thought a discussion about constellation placement could involve so much eyebrow-raising. Historians still argue whether these paths were purely observational or symbolic divisions tied to religious cosmology. Either way, they worked. By watching where stars rose and set within these zones, Babylonian astronomers could track seasonal drift, solstices, and equinoxes. One scribe pulls out a faded tablet with an entry you love. When the jaw of the bull star blinks, the nights grow short and the waters rise. That's Taurus. That's flood season. That's knowledge passed down not just for beauty, but for survival. You're invited to assist with the charting of a lesser-known star group, Shulgi's Fence, a cluster thought to lie near modern Capricorn. Its exact placement has always been tricky even for the seasoned scribes. Too dim, one mutters. Too stubborn, another says. You laugh. And then, slowly, it occurs to you. These names, Bull of Heaven, Swallow's Tail, Plough Star, Jaw of the Wolf, they aren't arbitrary. They're part of a system of memory. By giving shapes and identities to stars, the Babylonians weren't just cataloging. They were storytelling. The sky to them wasn't a cold dome of lights. It was a narrative ceiling filled with characters, consequences, and cosmic rhythms. You help align a new entry. Rising time of the star of the Scorpion, 3rd month. Midpoint of Anu's path. That's Scorpius. And the scribes nod at your accuracy. They ask if you want to stamp the tablet. You do. You press your thumb into a wet clay margin, marking it with a sleepy sort of pride. Elsewhere in the courtyard, a younger scribe is composing a star poem. Not for a tablet, but for the temple festival. It begins. Enlil carries the swallow on his shoulder, while Anu weaves the scorpion's tail with gold. Ea whispers to the river mouth, and the stars lean low to listen. It's not science. And yet, it is, because in Babylon, astronomy was never separate from art. The stars were data points, yes, but also songs, warnings, rituals, comfort. You step away as the sun climbs higher. The sky above fades to blue, hiding the stars again. But they're there. You know them now. You've seen their names, their routes, their quarrels. You've touched the tablets that hold their secrets. You glance behind you one last time. The scribes continue working, charting the invisible. Because even when the stars can't be seen, the sky keeps its records. And now, so do you. The courtyard is quiet tonight, but not empty. Lanterns sway gently from ropes strung between stone pillars, their flames flickering like hesitant stars. A warm wind snakes through the ziggurat corridors, carrying whispers of burning myrrh and distant river water. You're back at the temple, but tonight, something feels different. You've been invited to witness a ceremony, not the kind with drums or chanting, but a quiet, reverent one. A tablet burial. Yes, that's right. The Babylonians didn't just write charts, they retired them. You follow a winding corridor past shelves of archived clay. The air here smells dry and sacred. Every wall is lined with centuries of calculation, planetary tables, eclipse records, moon calendars, omen logs stacked by generation, year, and priesthood. And tonight, one chart has reached its end. Mainstream historical fact? Babylonian astronomers occasionally retired tablets that had served their purpose, especially when a new calculation method was adopted or when predictions proved incorrect. Some were buried under temples or set into walls, both as symbolic acts and as data preservation. The one being buried tonight? A Venus tablet. It's old, perhaps older than the priest carrying it. Its edges are cracked, and one corner is patched with wax. But the wedge marks are still legible. Phases, durations, evening and morning risings from nearly 50 years ago. You recognize the pattern now. The loop, the way Venus disappears, returns, vanishes again. The same celestial ballet you saw weeks ago. The priest places the tablet in a shallow clay box. Then, in a soft voice that's more breath than sound, he recites its history, when it was written, who scribed it, which omens it accompanied, and what it failed to predict. You raise your eyebrows. Yes. Failed. This particular tablet predicted a bright reappearance of Venus on the 15th day of the month of Samanu. It didn't happen. The sky was cloudy. Or maybe the calculations were wrong. Either way, the forecast missed. And in Babylon, even mistakes were preserved. Quirky tidbit? One recovered tablet includes a scratched-in note, did not appear. Check twice. May the gods forgive the calendar. Tonight, no forgiveness is requested. Just remembrance. You watch as the priest lowers the box into a prepared pit in the temple courtyard. Others gather around, scribes and star watchers, placing small offerings, grains, ink tablets, a reed stylus snapped in half. Then, slowly, they cover the box with earth. Not with haste. With ceremony. This isn't about hiding error. It's about honoring effort. You sit down on a flat stone nearby, the night warm and still. Someone beside you begins humming, a low, minor tune that seems half lullaby, half equation. You don't recognize it, but it fits. Historians still argue whether these burial rituals were common or whether this was reserved for particularly sacred tablets, those tied to kings, wars, or turning points. But the intent is clear, this tablet mattered. And now it will rest. One of the younger scribes whispers to you, they say if the buried tablet lies peacefully, the stars will write clearly next season. You nod. You don't know if you believe it, but you understand why they do, and maybe that's enough. You spend the next hour helping organize the replacement tablet, a fresh chart beginning with the next visible Venus cycle. The clay is still damp. Your stylus leaves clean, dark marks. You copy each position carefully, knowing this record will outlive you. By now, you've seen how this process works. One generation watches the sky. The next copies the marks. The third reads the results. Then it starts again. Not progress. Not perfection. Continuity. That's the Babylonian gift. Their astronomy wasn't built to conquer. It was built to endure. To survive centuries of kings, droughts, eclipses, and miscalculations. It was built on the faith that the sky repeats, even if we don't always understand it. You walk the edge of the temple wall as the moon rises over the Euphrates. A torch burns low beside a column etched with an inscription. The stars return. So must we. You don't know who wrote it, but you believe them. The stars are quieter now. Venus has dipped below the horizon. Mars flickers faintly. Jupiter watches like a bored but amused god. You head to your sleeping mat near the Eastern Observatory steps. And as you lie back, head to the stone, eyes to the sky, you think about the buried tablet. About every mark etched into its surface by steady hands and squinting eyes. About all the watchers who stood where you're standing now, thousands of years ago, peering up with questions and a stylus. They're gone, but their records aren't. And in Babylon, that's what immortality looks like. The day begins without a whisper of ceremony. No grand eclipse. No special alignment. No tablet burial, just the warm hum of morning. Soft sandals brushing stone, water sloshing in clay jars, and the smell of fried onions wafting over the temple walls. You follow the gentle rhythm of it, half asleep but deeply at peace, until a robed apprentice hurries toward you, clutching something strange. A sealed tablet, fresh, still warm, and it bears a challenge. You break the wax and unroll the accompanying scroll. It's a request from one of the royal advisors. Can the scholars of Babylon predict the next appearance of the wandering star that moves like a serpent? You squint. They're talking about Jupiter. It's a test. A small one, but the kind that matters. You've seen how the Babylonians treated planetary patterns. Not as suggestions, but as obligations. And Jupiter, known as Marduk's star, was one of the most crucial. Mainstream historical fact? Babylonian astronomers developed mathematical schemes to predict planetary positions, especially for Jupiter. They measured the time intervals between appearances at specific points in the sky, using arithmetic techniques remarkably sophisticated for their era. One tablet even calculates Jupiter's daily motion using a trapezoidal area formula, an ancient precursor to calculus. You're shown a copy of that tablet now. It's brittle, yes, and chipped at the corners, but the math is unmistakable. It tracks Jupiter's appearance in the night sky over a period of 12 years, marking its retrograde loops, brightness variations, and time spent in each zodiacal section. Jupiter isn't just a celestial object. It's a marker of kingship, and so the priests want to get this one right. Quirky tidbit? There's a story passed around by scribes, probably half-true, half-exaggerated, about a Babylonian king who delayed a coronation because Jupiter was late to rise. They say he slept in his royal sandals for 3 weeks just to avoid tempting fate. Tonight, you'll help calculate the next visible rising of Marduk's star. The temple's math room, usually quiet, is bustling. Scribes pass tablets like chefs passing spices, cross-referencing last year's Jupiter cycle with this year's solar position. Someone's muttering about whether to adjust for cloud-obscured data during the third watch last month. It's all very technical, but also somehow sacred. You settle beside a row of charts. First, they show you interval A, the time Jupiter takes to move from its first visibility in the east to its last visibility in the west. Then interval B, the time it's hidden in the sun's glare. Together, these allow you to estimate when it will return. You look at the table. Last first visibility date, 14th of Tashritu. Interval B, 60 days. Today's date, 12th of Kislemu. You do the math. Jupiter should reappear tonight. You double-check the numbers. It holds. And so preparations begin. Not military drills or dramatic decrees. Just scribes in long robes climbing temple stairs, carrying incense and clean tablets. You're handed a polished bowl of sesame oil for offering. Someone's playing a reed harp, not well, but with heart. You ascend the observatory as the last light of sun drains from the sky. Then you wait. Historians still argue whether Babylonian stargazers believed in gods moving through planets, or if they saw the gods in the patterns themselves. Whether Marduk was Jupiter or merely watched from behind it. Up here, though, there's no time for theology. Just sky. Then it happens. Low on the eastern horizon, so low it almost vanishes into the haze, you see it. A bright point. Pale gold. Steady. Gliding like a confident stranger arriving exactly on schedule. Marduk's star has returned. The scribes exhale. One of them bows low. Another jots down the exact position, whispering the coordinates into the ear of the high priest like it's the punchline to a riddle. You press your palms to the stone wall. It's still warm from the day's heat, but cooling fast. The star sits just above the horizon, neither rising nor rushing, just waiting. As if to say, yes, I came back, just like I always do. And it's not just you who feels it. Down in the city, small fires crackle in courtyards. A group of children points upward and squeals. A woman laughs from behind a curtain. Somewhere, someone begins to sing in low, unhurried syllables, naming the stars like family. You smile. This too will go on a tablet. Not just the position of Jupiter, but the day, the moon phase, the wind direction. And maybe, if the scribe is feeling generous, a line about how the city felt under its light. You glance up again. It's brighter now, rising with purpose. A sign, a schedule, a story. The priest beside you says it's always good when Marduk returns before the barley ripens. You ask him why. He just shrugs, because it means we're still part of the pattern. You stay on the roof a while longer, watching Marduk's star trace its slow arc into the night. You think of the buried tablets, the burned ones, the misread ones. And how, through all of that, this star still came back. Maybe that's all ancient astronomy ever tried to prove, that the sky remembers. And so must we. The heat today is different. Not sharp, not blistering, just heavy. The kind of heat that makes even the wind feel slow. You find yourself tucked under the archway beside the temple's northern gate, watching flies spiral lazily in the air and wondering, not for the first time, how the Babylonians managed to do anything in this weather. And yet they did, because today you're witnessing something rare, a planetary review. No, not a military review. Not a king marching his soldiers in polished armor. This is a celestial audit, a cross-checking of years' worth of planetary data, compared against omens, crop yields, river floods, and political changes. You are, quite literally, going to compare the sky to the ground. Mainstream historical fact? Babylonian scholars routinely reviewed historical planetary records to identify correlations between celestial patterns and earthly events. This wasn't just superstition, it was a form of empirical astronomy mixed with symbolic causation. They called it Nazirdi Same, the secrets of heaven. Today's review focuses on Saturn, known as the star of Ninurta, the god of war and agriculture. An odd pairing, but a fitting one. Saturn's slow motion across the sky made it a natural candidate for long-term omens. You follow the scribes into the tablet chamber. The air here is cooler, shaded, and smells like cedar oil and ink. The chief recorder unrolls a linen scroll listing the king's milestones from the last 10 years. 3 temple dedications, 2 border skirmishes, 1 severe drought, and the birth of a white ox in the province of Dur. Your job? Match these events against Saturn's position at the time. It feels like a historical scavenger hunt. First, they bring out the Saturn tablet from year 2 of the current reign. You scan the symbols. On the month the drought began, Saturn had just entered retrograde. The scribe notes this and adds a wedge symbol beside it, a quiet nod to the truth of the omen. Quirky tidbit? A preserved commentary tablet from this era records that, when Saturn reverses in the House of the Lion, grain bends from thirst. It's both poetic and eerily accurate, especially if you've seen the withered barley fields outside the city. Then comes year 4. A rebellion was quelled near the western hills. You check Saturn's placement. Still retrograde, but now approaching a stationary point. The priest mutters, Ninurta halts his march. So must the rebels. You suppress a grin. It's both interpretation and narrative control. Historians still argue whether this was data mining or genuine belief. Did they search for patterns to explain the past or to legitimize it? Was it correlation, causation, or something stranger? Maybe it doesn't matter, because here, in this shadowed room filled with dust and devotion, meaning is the goal, not proof. You assist in aligning charts from year 7 through 9. Saturn's slow drift is mesmerizing, spending nearly 3 years crossing a single zodiacal house. The scribes speak of it in almost human terms. He lingers, one says. He refuses to leave the house of the goat. They say this with the same tone someone might use to describe a stubborn uncle. The final tablet they unearth is scorched along one edge, rescued from a fire 2 decades ago. The record is partially damaged, but still usable. It shows Saturn's transit overlapping with a partial solar eclipse and a time of political confusion in the south. The chief priest taps this section twice. This alignment, he says, is not good for young kings. You raise an eyebrow. Why? He smiles faintly. Because the gods walk slowly when they doubt the path. You stare at the wedge marks, at the painstakingly scribed symbols of a sky that's long since changed, and you wonder if they ever got it wrong. Of course they did. There are tablets with scratched-out symbols, with ink blotches and frantic corrections. One even bears the phrase, "The signs were strange. The moon did not answer." But even that, especially that, was recorded, because Babylonian astronomy wasn't about being infallible. It was about being faithful to the pattern, about listening, not just seeing. As evening settles, the scribes begin organizing the tablets back onto their shelves. You assist carefully, reverently. Some of these records are nearly 100 years old. Others were etched last month, but they all do the same thing: map the sky onto our story. You walk out into the cooling twilight. Saturn is visible tonight, low, dim, but unmistakable. You watch it hover just above the rooftops, quiet as ever, unhurried, unchanging, and yet so full of consequence. You think back to everything you've learned, how planets loop, how priests read eclipses, how calendars stretch to contain contradictions, how scribes bury their mistakes with love. And you realize Babylon didn't just track stars. They believed in remembering, even when the omens contradicted, even when the sky misbehaved, even when Saturn moved like molasses and the crops still failed. They kept writing, because somewhere in the mess of clay and cosmos was a thread, a rhythm meant to be followed. You glance back at the temple gates, now dark and locked for the night, then back at Saturn, still watching. Still slow, still writing back. The temple bells don't ring this morning. Not because there's nothing to do, but because everyone's already awake. You rise to the distant sound of sandals scuffing stone, styluses tapping hurriedly, and more than one priest muttering in the kind of tone normally reserved for misbehaving goats. Something's happened. You follow the noise into the observatory courtyard, where a group of scribes have clustered around a fresh tablet, still damp at the edges. Their faces range from puzzled to downright gleeful, like children watching a dog walk on 2 legs. And then you see it, an unexpected eclipse. Mainstream historical fact? While the Babylonians were impressively accurate with eclipse predictions, especially lunar eclipses, there were still surprises. Particularly solar eclipses, which are harder to track due to their narrow visibility paths. When one occurred outside of forecast, it could throw the temple into brief chaos. This morning, someone spotted a sudden dimming just before dawn. A partial solar eclipse, barely visible, barely long enough to confirm, but real. And unpredicted. That matters. Not because someone's in trouble, but because the sky misbehaved. Now all eyes turn to the clay shelves. You're handed 3 different omen tablets and told to find the closest match. Each tablet contains dozens of entries. If an eclipse appears during the morning in the month of Ataru, and dogs howl, grain will fail. If an eclipse comes suddenly and passes quickly, expect the fall of a distant king. If an eclipse goes unpredicted and Venus is bright, priests will quarrel. You glance upward. Venus is, in fact, very bright this morning. And judging by the animated disagreement between two high priests near the east wall, yep, that third omen might be the winner. Quirky tidbit. One ancient Babylonian tablet contains a scratched-in apology, clearly made in haste. The eclipse came early. The omens were unclear. The sun mocked us. It's unclear whether this was poetic or literal, but you admire the honesty. You sit cross-legged with a wax board and begin reconstructing what happened. The eclipse was spotted just as the eastern sky began to lighten, lasted no more than a few minutes, and covered roughly 1/3 of the sun's disk. Several scribes agree it shouldn't have happened. At least, not here. Someone suggests the southern provinces might have predicted it, but the local forecast had been clear. Historians still argue whether these unexpected eclipses caused real panic or were simply accepted as the limits of the system. What's clear is that every unpredicted event became a new puzzle and sometimes a new omen. You ask a priest what should happen now. He shrugs. We revise. We observe. We try again. He gestures toward the tablet currently being scribed, its top line already etched. In the 5th year, on the morning before the 9th day of Ataru, the sun dimmed without warning. Venus stood bright. The air was still. The city watched. You can't help but smile. It's not just a record. It's a story. As the day continues, you help cross-reference the eclipse with other variables. Was Mars visible last night? Did the moon's phase shift earlier than expected? Were the birds unusually quiet? Every detail matters because every pattern is a potential message. By mid-afternoon, the temple astrologers gather to produce a formal response, not just a description, but a reading. The king's advisors should delay major decisions for 5 days. Offerings to Shamash must be doubled. Watch the goats. If they refuse to eat, the omen is doubled. You don't question the goat part. You've learned better. As the sun sets, you find yourself beside the temple well, watching the last light slip behind the rooftops. A boy nearby sketches stars in the dust with a stick. His mother watches from the shadows, humming an old lullaby. And above, the sky returns to its normal rhythm. Venus. Mars. The steady drip of stars rising into their appointed places. You realize, with a kind of soft awe, that the unexpected eclipse hasn't shaken the priests. It's excited them. To them, every surprise is a fresh crack in the wall of heaven, a place to peek through. You lean against the warm stone and remember one of the first phrases you heard when you arrived in Babylon. The stars speak softly, but they never lie. Maybe, but sometimes they go off script. And when they do, the Babylonians sharpen their styluses, roll up their sleeves, and start writing. Because the sky isn't a fixed answer. It's a conversation. And this morning's eclipse, just the sky clearing its throat. You wake before dawn again. Not because anyone calls you, or because the temple bells ring, or even because of the roosters. You wake because your body has, over time, begun to sync with the sky. You stir when the constellations turn, when the last star fades, when Venus tips over the horizon like a sleepy candle. You rise, stretch, and head up to the observatory. Today is calendar day. Not festival day, not star mapping day, calendar day. The day when the temple scribes gather to adjust the official year based on celestial movement. You've seen charts before, of course. You've even helped calculate eclipses and planetary risings. But this is different. This is when they change time itself. Mainstream historical fact: the Babylonian calendar was lunisolar, based on both the moon cycles and the solar year. Since lunar months fall short of the solar year by about 11 days, the Babylonians had to insert an intercalary month every few years to keep seasons aligned. The decision was made by priests and scholars, based on astronomical observation. Today, the discussion is whether to insert a 13th month. You settle in among the scribes, some of whom are already muttering over charts. They compare lunar sightings to equinox predictions. They check barley growth against last year's planting date. Someone swears the river rose too early, which throws the grain schedule into question. They light a ceremonial lamp. The debate begins. On one hand, the moon has come early 4 months in a row. That's not unusual, but it's adding up. On the other hand, summer festivals haven't shifted too far. So, should they wait? Insert the extra month next year instead? Quirky tidbit? There's a half-burned tablet in the temple archive that simply reads, "The barley came late, but the moon was stubborn. We argued. The king slept. We added the month anyway. You admire the honesty. One scribe brings up the stars of the lion, Leo in modern terms, and their current position at dusk. Traditionally, their appearance should coincide with the month of Abu, a late summer period. But right now, they're showing up in the month before. That's a problem. If the stars are ahead of the month, it means the calendar is slipping. And when the calendar slips, so does everything else: harvest, taxes, omens, festivals, royal decrees, temple rituals. The stars are not just decoration here. They are the spine of society. You watch as the scribes unfurl a master chart on a long clay slab. It lists every month's lunar start date for the last 19 years. Someone adds a fresh wedge mark, then another. Then pauses. This is the moment. Priest clears his throat. We declare a second Ulyulu. That's the name of the intercalary month, Ulyulu 2. It won't happen every year. But this year? It must. The decision is written in triplicate. Once on wax, once on clay, and once on linen for the palace. And just like that, the year is lengthened. Time bends ever so slightly to match the heavens. Historians still argue how precise the Babylonians were with these adjustments. Some believe they followed fixed cycles. Others believe it was more observational. But either way, they managed to keep their calendar remarkably aligned with both seasons and sky. And they did it with no computers, no telescopes, no electricity, just math, memory, and a great deal of staring at the moon. As the sun rises higher, you help carry the revised calendar tablet to the temple courtyard. It's placed in a prominent niche beside the ziggurat steps where merchants, farmers, and priests will pass it daily. Small children already peer up at it, pointing. You wonder if they understand that today time changed. Not by much. Just a month, but enough. You wander the outer gardens where the palms rattle in the soft wind and a cat sprawls lazily across a sunlit step. Everything feels the same, and yet the year now has 13 months instead of 12. All because the stars said so. You pass a farmer unloading onions from a cart. He waves. Is it a long year now? He asks casually. You nod. Long year. He grunts, not surprised. Knew it. My goats started shedding early. You blink. Of course. The goats always know. As evening comes, you sit beside the ziggurat wall, watching the first stars appear. One of the scribes sits beside you and hands you a scrap of parchment with a small poem scrawled across it. When time is stubborn, we follow the sky. When the moon wanders, we stretch the path. The year is not wrong, only delayed. And still, the stars forgive us. You thank him. He shrugs. It's from my grandfather. He used to say the sky was patient with Babylon, because Babylon paid attention. You stare upward. Venus again. Jupiter, slow and bright. A crescent moon just sharp enough to cut through the dusk. And somewhere beyond all that, the calendar ticking forward. Quiet. Steady. Ancient. No eclipse, no omen, no festival. Just stars and the sound of sandals on worn stone steps. The city exhales under the weight of another clear sky. You make your way slowly through the eastern gate of the temple, climbing one last time to the observatory. The sky above you has become familiar, less a mystery now, and more a companion. Each star a name you remember. Each wandering planet a traveler you've followed for weeks, maybe months. You didn't plan it this way, but somehow this last evening feels like a goodbye. The scribes are already on the rooftop. They sit in calm circles, soft laughter drifting between them like wood smoke. No styluses today. No tablets. Just eyes to the sky and a kind of sacred stillness. You're handed a cool drink, barley water, laced with mint, and invited to sit. Tonight, they say, is not for measuring. It's for witnessing. You lean back against the warm stone and let your eyes drift upward. The stars are just beginning to thicken, dotting the velvet dome like powdered ash. And there, yes, Saturn, slow and pale, still in the house of the goat. Jupiter, regal and smug as ever. Venus, flirtatious. Mars, sullen. The moon, a lazy crescent dangling low like a hammock. Mainstream historical fact? Some Babylonian texts describe stargazing festivals where no omens were read, no divinations made, just collective observation. A ritual of attention. A reminder that sometimes the sky simply is. No king's fate to decide. No eclipse to interpret. No chart to etch. Just stars. And you sip the last of the barley water and let your thoughts slow to match the heavens. The rhythm of the city fades behind you, the distant cry of traders closing up shop, the soft clink of temple bells tied to a goat's horns, the low lullabies of night-watch families singing their children to sleep. Quirky tidbit? A tiny side tablet, found years ago behind a temple niche, simply reads, "The sky was soft tonight. I did not measure it." It's unsigned, probably never meant for archives. But it endured. Like all things written in clay, historians still argue whether the Babylonians ever felt awe in the way we define it, emotional, poetic, transcendent, or whether theirs was purely reverent, scientific, functional. But lying here now, you don't think it matters. Because awe is attention. And no one paid better attention to the sky than Babylon. You glance over at the youngest apprentice, a boy barely old enough to read tablets. He's lying flat on his back, hands folded across his chest, whispering each star's name like a bedtime prayer. You did that too once. You will again. The priest beside you stirs and says, the sky is always older than us, but not always wiser. You nod. Then the bell rings. Once. Gently. It's not a signal. It's a sigh. You stand, brush the dust from your robe, and take one last look at the heavens. A familiar tapestry now. A soft, wheeling clock. A stage for gods and goats alike. You have followed omens. You have buried broken tablets. You have watched eclipses that defied explanation. And you have seen the stars, yes, really seen them, on a night when they asked for nothing in return. Now, it is time to sleep. The priests begin their descent. The rooftop empties slowly. You remain for a moment, still cross-legged, still watching the slow westward drift of stars overhead. They're not in a hurry. Neither are you. And so we begin. Your breathing slows, sinking with the gentle hush of the Babylonian night. Each exhale softer than the last, each thought folding gently like linen robes at the end of a long journey. The stone beneath you is still warm from the day, but fading. Its heat pulls the tiredness from your limbs, carrying it down into the earth, where it can rest. The sky above is unchanged, familiar, quiet. It moves slowly, confidently, like a hand guiding you towards sleep. A breeze stirs through the garden palms below the ziggurat. You can almost hear it, a whisper through leaves, a lullaby made of dust and memory. Somewhere in the distance, a water jug tips gently and its spill becomes music. Even the stars seem to hush their glow, softening at the edges as your eyes close. You are no longer counting the stars. You are inside them now. Their names blur into comfort, the plow star, the jaw of the wolf, the star of the swallow's tail. They drift past you like friends, not strangers. Companions for a night's journey across a sky that never needed translation, just attention. The breath slows again. You are not deciphering omens. You are not tracing orbits. You are simply lying here, wrapped in centuries of starlight as time folds gently over you like a silk sheet. And in this stillness, you realize the sky was never distant. It was always yours. So let the night carry you now. Let the silence deepen. Let the Babylonian sky wheel gently overhead, a dome of peace and slowness. Sleep now beneath a sky that remembers. Sleep in the soft rhythm of stars. Sleep, sleep, sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.